Oh, okay. Found it.
Okay, hopefully I am recording.
Okay.
All right. Hey, Jenny, let's introduce ourselves.
All right. Hey, San Diego. I'm Jenny Reinish.
Hey, San Diego, I'm Louise Palanker. And together we produced a film called Margaret Singer, Seeking Light, which we were very proud to share with the San Diego Jewish Film Festival. So thank you so much for honoring us with this opportunity to speak with you virtually.
Happy to be
Jenny,
here.
yeah, let's start with some of your background.
My background. So the short version of my background is that I started out in professional theater as a stage manager and director, but I have wanted to do film since I was about 5 years old. And I gradually worked my way into television and then into film and video production. I also have a master's in education, so I teach filmmaking. And I've made 4 documentaries and worked on a bunch of feature films in all varieties of genre and all levels, from big Hollywood productions to little shoestring budgets and everything in between.
Awesome. So my background is I also have a teaching degree, which I think is great because we co-teach our class. And I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I moved out to Los Angeles to get into the entertainment industry. I wound up with a job as a studio page, and I worked on all of the Norman Lear sitcoms. And then that led to me being offered a job at a show called PM Magazine, where very quickly I was writing and producing segments. And then from there, I met a disc jockey named Rick Dees, who gave me a job writing his syndicated countdown show called the Rick Dees Weekly Top 40, which introduced me to some fellow disc jockeys at KISS FM in Los Angeles. And we formed a company called Premier Radio Networks. And that went on to be sold to what is now iHeartMedia. And it was just a crazy ride that I went on. But along the way, I taught myself how to make films because I've always just been really interested in storytelling, and I always wanted to be able to manipulate the story myself. And if you're just dependent upon somebody else to do it, you have to sit with them and say, how about this or how about that? But as soon as we could put filmmaking software on our computers, and I know, Jenny, you probably have the same trajectory. As soon as we could put filmmaking software on our own computers, we didn't have to sit in a bay with a guy that was part of a union. We could do it ourselves, and it was just absolutely game-changing for creatives like us who love to tell stories.
Oh, those days in the Bay with the reel-to-reel. That was fun.
It was very analog, and you had to make linear choices. So if you remove something, you had to put something in there that was exactly the same time length, or to fill in a space. And then once you could move things around, it was just like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. So yeah, I just started making films because it was just, for me, it was the next natural pathway to storytelling. I wanted to I grew up as a kid. I was a fan of a band called the Cowsills, and I found out that one of the Cowsills was playing in clubs in Los Angeles, and someone said, oh, you should go see him. And I was like, yeah, I don't really need to address that, thank you. And I put it off for like 20 years, and then finally, when the internet made it so that you could search people, I searched the Cowsills, and I was like, I should really go. Anyway, long story short, I wound up making a documentary about the Cowsills, and that was really how I taught myself filmmaking, because I just wanted to figure out. I was in the radio industry. I didn't know how to make a film, so I'd learned while doing.
And earliest memories are mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, which is when I knew I wanted to make documentaries. And that
Really?
never changed, and put me in front of any wildlife with a camera in my hand and you will never get me to move. So
Yeah.
it's been that way to this day, but unfortunately, up to this point, all of my films have been people story focused. But that may change at some point. I have a dream to go out and do the definitive documentary on jellyfish. Don't ask me why. So yeah, that was my earliest inspiration, and the first chance that I got to be a part of a real hands-on part of a film, as not working in the TV studio as an assistant or associate producer, and the stuff that I did, or going through edit footage as all the little jobs that I had to learn the business. But the first chance that I really got, I was still teaching, and a friend of mine had written a great script and hadn't gotten anywhere trying to sell it, and said, let's just do it. And some of my then films or theater students were really talented, and the movie script centered around some junior high aged kids. And so we cast them, and we spent in a summer. It was me, the writer, who was also the director and the cinematographer, and an occasional hair and makeup person helping out. And we spent an entire summer filming this, you know, who knew where it would go project on an HD camera with little mini tapes. And it ended up being one of the first films that was shown on, at the time, what was it? The Independent Film Channel had a series called DV Theater, right when digital video became big. And so that was my first foray into filmmaking, and that was about 22 years ago.
And what is that film called?
First, Last, and Deposit. And it's still out there. I'm not sure where it is at this point, but I know you can find it and you can watch it. And it's about a junior high age girl and her mom who end up homeless and living in their car. Semi-autobiographical to the friend of mine who wrote it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It feels like it should be available on YouTube by now. I'm about ready to put Family Band. My film was on Amazon Prime and it aired on Showtime for 2 years. I'm about ready to put it on YouTube because I found out through the fan pages that I have for the film, and that you know, people were saying, well, where can I watch it? And someone said, oh, YouTube. And I was like, wait, no, my film, I have all these special features up on my YouTube channel, but my film is not on YouTube. So I'm like, can you tell me where it's on YouTube? So this is the third time I've had to write a cease and desist. And P.S. YouTube is really quick. If you can say, this is my copyright, it's not theirs, they take it down like instantly. But I feel like it's about time that I put it up, because the film came out about 8 years ago. So it's time. How do you feel about that? At what point should we make our work just available to everybody?
You know, it's a tough call, because I've had projects that have shown up on offshore illegal pirated sites where you can pay $3 and download a movie. And I tried to go and get it removed. And when they're offshore, they don't listen. So I feel like I get wanting to share our intellectual property and giving everyone a chance to see it at a point, but I also feel like we worked really hard. And, you know, in the case of the film of mine that was pirated, I did that totally out of my own pocket. There was no investors. There was nobody to help with it. I paid for everything that had to be paid for, and I made the movie over 2 years by myself. And so you don't make money being a filmmaker, unfortunately, a lot of the time. And so I mean, I would rather put it up as a pay-per-view for that same $3 or $4. And if somebody really wants to see it, then hopefully they're going to understand that goes to me being able to make more content for them to watch eventually. Right. So I don't know. There's some projects that I feel like I might be ready to share with anyone who wants to see it. But at the same time, if somebody's willing to invest a few dollars, it helps make the next project possible.
Right. Let's move on to our next question. Let's see, your involvement with films, director, writer, producer, actor, music, composer, etc. For me, I've only made documentaries, and I've only been the director, producer. I just kind of like plunged in that way. I've never made a narrative. So that to me feels very overwhelming, and I'm just completely in awe of people who make them.
I've worked on narrative films, like I was just talking about, as, you know, an assistant to the director, as an assistant to the producer, as a production manager, as a casting director, as a location manager. I've kind of had every job from PA up to producer, director, cinematographer. So for me, when I decided this is what I wanted to do and I quit teaching, I took every single job that I could from the bottom on up until I learned everything I needed to learn. So, you know, I've never really officially done any of the electrician jobs or the set building, although I did that when I was in theater. But yeah, I've kind of done every job there is to learn the craft.
Awesome. Let's discuss a Jewish-themed film that we've been involved in. I think for both of us, it was the two films that we made. Then how we met each other was we were asked to interview all of the Santa Barbara area Holocaust survivors. So Jenny and I had the blessing of meeting all of these like spectacular people who we got to sit and have in-depth conversations with. It's like when you film people, it's not just, oh, I met him. It's, oh, I had this powerful, unbelievably moving conversation with him about the most important aspect of his history. So yeah, it was really illuminating for us. And go ahead and talk about what became of that.
About 30 people sharing their stories that in many cases they barely shared even with their own families. So it was a blessing to be witness to those stories. And then, you know, it was a wealth of information, more than we could ever fit into one film. We could probably make a film about each individual that we interviewed. So we narrowed it down to about a dozen who had not a similar story, but the themes were similar, and in that at some point they were safe, and we shared the stories of them growing up before the Nazi invasion and before Hitler came to power, and followed them until they were safe in one way or another, whatever that meant for them. So
right.
that was a powerful experience. That was a life-changing experience.
Right, and through that experience, we met a woman named Margaret Singer, and we were both captured and delighted by her. She's just a like kind of a translucent being, and there's just something magical about Margaret. So we had always talked about maybe making a short and focusing on Margaret. So we finally did that earlier this year, or maybe it was last year.
It was a little over a year ago that we finished the film.
Okay, yeah, it was a year ago. So go ahead and talk about that.
So, I mean, Margaret, like Louise, like you were just saying, she's magic. There is no other word for her, at least for me, but she is magical. And you don't come across someone like her more than once or twice in a lifetime, if you're lucky, even that many times. And everything she says is like words to live by. Her wisdom and her just her way of looking at things, and she had a perspective that nobody else has, because there was a way for her to turn anything into a positive and anything into hope. And so my students had interviewed her the summer prior to us making the movie. And I mean, this was a group of teenage girls in a film class, and she sat down with them for an hour, and she had them all laughing, and she had them all in tears, and she had them all wanting to be her best friend. And so and they talk about her still all the time. And, you know, when somebody in 1 hour makes a lifetime impression, especially on teenagers, that says a lot. So when we decided to do this film, we had that footage. And since she had been part of our project about 12, 13 years prior, we had that footage. And then we sat down and interviewed her for one more long interview and got some other shots along the way and put it together.
She was an incredibly joyful and warm and intuitive person, while also being quite stubborn. So it was a fascinating combination of elements in one human. She could be very stern, and she could be the most loving presence you've ever been with, because you felt like she knew you, and the things that she was saying to you spoke directly to your heart. Like, how does she know how to do that? It was really quite captivating. And the miracle was that we filmed her. We finished our movie. We presented our movie at the Santa Barbara Jewish Film Festival. And 5 days later, Margaret came down ill. And from that point forward, she was taken to a hospice, and 3 months later, she passed. But she did have the opportunity to celebrate her life with her community. And
you know, it's interesting. You visited her all the time too, and I tried to go every day. There were days that I missed because I had to work, or scheduling just didn't work, but I got there more days than not in the months that she was in hospice. And and she was planning on leaving hospice as soon as possible up until just a couple of weeks before I think she decided that was it and she was ready. And she was actually, they were making plans for her to leave hospice up to a point. But it was like, I felt like I was in the classroom every time I went in there. And some days we didn't talk about anything, but I mean, even just learning, you know, how to accept your fate gracefully. On the days that we didn't talk about anything, but every time I went there, I came away with so much gratitude for whatever we talked about that day, or whether we just sat together. And it was like I learned more in those couple of months by sitting, just being there and holding space with her than I think I've learned in my whole life.
And one of the tragedies of what's going on right now with our pandemic is, you know, I think about Margaret and how blessed we are that we got to spend that time with her. Imagine if it had been a year later, we wouldn't have been allowed in. And so there's people that are missing those moments with their loved ones. And that's just one small piece of this grand tragedy. But our film is called Margaret Singer, Seeking Light. It's still not available on YouTube. And we actually were in 3 additional festivals after San Diego, all of which didn't happen because of the pandemic. So none of us know here on Earth, you know, when the plague lifts, what we're all going to be doing. But, you know, hopefully there will be renewed life for all of us and for this particular film so that you can share 20 minutes with Margaret. All right, so what else do we need to talk? Challenges in creating films. Oh, there's just so many. Making a film is like solving 10 billion problems sequentially, sometimes simultaneously.
Exactly.
You know, you have to be a project manager. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a project, and I think somewhere in this list of questions is what's your next project? I've got a project I've been talking about for 8 or 9 years, which I decided this was the year it was going to happen. I decided that in late January, early February. And then the world decided, no, you're not doing anything right now, because it involved some travel and it involved a lot of logistics with a lot of people involved. And so, yeah, that's the filmmaking process is hard enough without the challenges of where we are right now. But when you're an independent filmmaker and you're trying to pull something together on your own, it's huge.
Can you talk about what it's going to be when it
pardon me,
does happen?
Well, this one is I've done dog rescue forever. And so one of the things that I've seen over the years, between working as a teacher and with all different students from all different backgrounds, and then working with shelters and talking to families either trying to adopt or sadly trying to rehome a dog, is that there's things we can do to control population that we're not doing. And so I heard one too many times, like, oh, I'd never get my dog fixed. That's, you know, that's not manly. And so I had this idea as a filmmaker that I could create a piece that was educational, but using humor to educate people. And so I wanted to do a film, or I will do a film once the lockdown is lifted and we can get back to life, where I can explore some of the stereotypes and myth bust some of the stereotypes about having your dog spayed or neutered, and hopefully make it very lighthearted and humorous. And I've got some key people already involved that I think are going to be great on camera. And so the challenge is, it's like, wait, you want to make a film about that?
You're going to have to cast some hilarious dogs.
Exactly. Some hilarious dogs, and hopefully some hilarious people who are big into rescue. So that's the challenge. That's
all right, so the next question has to do with the filmmaking process. That's very general, but I guess if people don't make films, they don't know where we even begin. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, we can talk about our process. I mean, for us, it was kind of jump right in on both films. I mean, we on our first one, we played marbles. We had some outside help in scheduling interviews with all of our local survivors. And so the first step was knowing who we were getting the camera gear set up, getting everything ready, and then conducting the interviews, which you did a great job of asking the questions. while I was running the cameras. And once we had all the footage, you know, 30, 40, maybe 50 hours of footage that we had, it was a matter of just sitting down and going through all of it and then finding what tied the pieces together and how to put the film together.
I think, you know, what you can think about doing if you're thinking about making a documentary, if you have an idea, shoot one thing. It can be an interview or it could be an event. And I think of events as important because they're going to happen whether or not you're there with your camera. And so you want to capture them, even if you don't have full permission or you don't have the idea fully fleshed out. But so, for example, with the Cowsill story, they were going to be singing the national anthem at Fenway Park. And at that point in time, the Cowsills didn't sing together a lot. They had been a family band that was very famous in the late 60s as teen idols, and they had a lot of hit records. And now here they are here they were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, whatever their ages were, and they didn't perform together a lot, and they were invited to perform the national anthem. So I thought, I'm going to either talk Bob into letting me come, or that's going to come and go and we won't have it on camera. So that was kind of where that film began, was you saw how much story there was once you spent that time with them, once you took a trip with them. So there's usually one meaningful thing that happens with us interviewing Margaret and then knowing, you know, what she had said and what we needed to follow up on. And so go with one thing, film it, and then sit with it, watch it, and then the ideas start to come. And sometimes things happen while you're filming and you're just saying, oh, this story is changing, and you just have to go with that.
And to add on to that, so I did a film called Behind the Lines, which was a behind the scenes look at fighting major wildfires. And I only made this film because I randomly started talking to a fireman during one of our big fires here in Santa Barbara, and he saw that I had camera equipment with me, and he's like, oh, do you want to come and film? And so, you know, as a filmmaker, don't say no to anything. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I went out and I got to film where they don't let the press usually, and the commanders and whatever don't talk to the press, but I wasn't the press. I was just a girl with a camera. Mm-hmm. So I went out and filmed, and that led to being allowed to film more times. And so I had all this footage before I even knew that I was putting together a documentary. And the thing was, I spent a year putting this together, and I submitted it to my first film festival, and I didn't get in, and I was crushed. And then I sat back down with it. I took a month or two and, you know, licked my wounds. And then I said, okay, let's look at how this is put together. And when I looked at it after taking a little break, I went, you know, there's so many things that I could do differently to make it more engaging. And I went back and I re-edited it, and it got into all sorts of festivals and won a bunch of awards. So, you know, sometimes your ideas, you have to be willing to let them change and evolve. And even if that means taking some time away and then looking at it with fresh eyes, or mm-hmm. listening to outside voices, and helping you make it a stronger project. You can't ever be so tied to your idea that you get in your own way.
Very good advice. And now they would like for us to discuss the filmmaking, or the filmography. And I'm going to defer to Jenny on this because I'm more of the storyteller, and Jenny's more of the technical person in our team.
Well, a filmography is just the films that we've made. So yeah,
it's not cinematography. Okay.
No, it's not the cinematography. It's the filmography. So for me, besides the two films that Louise and I have made together, I did a film called Behind the Lines, which is about fighting wildfires. And my first documentary was a documentary on cancer survivors called The Aphrodite Project. And then aside from that, the one I talked about earlier, First, Last, and Deposit, I worked on. And I spent 4.5 years working for the Montecito Picture Company, at which time I was involved with making Old School and Euro Trip, and I think there were a couple other films that happened while I was with that Hollywood production company. But yeah, that's my background.
So for me, it's we played marbles, Remembering a Stolen Childhood, which is now available on YouTube and Vimeo, and then Family Band: The Cowsill Story, which is available on Amazon Prime. Then I went to the Women's March and I just made a film, and it's on YouTube. It's called Praying with My Feet. And then we made the Margaret Singer movie, Seeking Light. And that's pretty much it. I have a YouTube channel, and I'm always making travel movies, and I have a new show called Quarantainment, where I'm advising people what they should watch and do while we're all in quarantine. So I like to video blog, so I'm always posting something. Plus I have a weekly podcast called Things I Found Online that's available also on my YouTube channel. So I'm always making something, but it's not always categorized as film. Film is a specific category.
I'm always making something too, but when I'm not making the projects we talked about, I'm making something for my clients, because I'm a full-time filmmaker, and the majority of the time is spent doing the things that pay the bills. So I do a lot of work for local nonprofits, corporations in town, individuals. I do events, you name it, I've probably filmed it.
Talk about how life is changing in terms of what is being asked of professional filmmakers during this downtime, because we're all adjusting.
I've had some editing to finish, so I've been busy with that, and I've had a few people inquire about me doing additional editing, which is great, because the majority of what I do usually involves going out with my camera into a crowd, and so that cannot happen right now, and most people I know are really trying to figure out how to piece it together. So I have been asked to do some filming out in public, and it's gonna be a wait and see to see what the regulations are at that point, and how they can, or if they can, implement safe distancing for me to be out there and filming for them. But yeah, right now work is slowly drying up, and I'm getting inquiries for if and when this lifts, whenever that might be, and so that's great, because I know I will still have a business when we can all get out again, and there'll be lots of events eventually, but it may change how things are for a while. For me, technically wise, the biggest challenge is figuring out how to sanitize microphones, because I don't want to have people passing microphones around when we get back into this. So that'll be a challenge I'm working on trying to figure that out. But yeah, it's definitely different.
It seems like a lot of people will be filming things on their own end, and then submitting footage to you and asking you to put it together into something pretty.
That's what I'm doing right now for a few people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so we need to talk about the filmmakers who have influenced us.
I mean, the very first thing that I said at the beginning, Mutual of Omaha, and what was his name? Marlon Perkins. That would be, I mean, it's so weird to say that, but since that's one of my earliest memories, and that's what set me on this path. So I'd say he's been my biggest influence, but I've been lucky to get to meet and spend some time talking to people like Michael Moore, and working at the Montecito Picture Company for the years that I did, and working with people like Ivan Reitman, the great director, really taught me everything I needed to know about doing this for a living.
So for me, I'm just going to say Ken Burns, because I mean, he takes a topic that he's passionate about, and then he goes deep and makes beautiful, moving films that include storytelling, and that's just so powerful. And I think that, he's the greatest at that craft.
Agreed.
Discuss you read one.
That's what I was gonna say. Discuss your hobbies and passions. So right now I can't do my biggest hobby / passion, which is, aside from filmmaking, hiking and being out in nature, because everybody with our lockdown currently has decided they're all suddenly nature enthusiasts, and the trails are crowded. But last year I covered over 1,000 kilometers on the trails, and my goal is to still do that this year, although I might be going a lot farther to make up for lost time. So I love taking photos when I'm out. Photography, it's different from making movies, but I love going out, and I especially love nature photography and macro, real close-up shots, and just seeing things from a different perspective. So that, and dog rescue, and horses. Those are my hobbies.
Yeah, those are all your big things. So for me, it's definitely everything having to do with filmmaking and photography. also reading and history. And I'm a musician and a songwriter. I play guitar and drums, so I'm passionate about music and history, and especially passionate about the history of all the things that fascinate me, like anything in the entertainment industry and politics. So I'm a big news junkie, and I watch a lot. And
we
yeah,
both love teaching.
and we both love kids and teaching. Yeah, it's hard to just rattle off your hobbies, because I'm someone that's interested in everything, and I'm especially interested in people and what they're interested in. So, I love hearing about what lights people up, and I love the internet, because the internet allows for these collections of personalities that have similar interests, and then they kind of blossom because it's everybody's sort of celebrating and accepting each other, because they're all geeking out on the same thing. So they're not the weirdos anymore, and the internet has made everybody cool. and I kind of love that. The internet can be very cruel, but can also be a great place to nurture enthusiasm and acceptance.
And right now, it's the lifeblood.
Right now, it's what we've got. It's holding us together.
Exactly.
All right. So let's see. Is there a book that you would like to make into a film? If yes, please explain why.
Yes. For a long time, and it's not one that I can refer anyone to, because it was actually a short story written by the wife of an old friend of mine that I got my hands on years ago. And it's fictional, so it would be a foray for me into making a short narrative film. And it's creepy. It's a dark, creepy story. And I am not a dark person. I'm generally the first one to see the good in a situation, or try desperately to find the good in a situation. But for some reason, it resonated with me. And it's about a woman locked out in the woods, and there's a dark, deep twist to how she got there. And I mean, it's probably only a 5 or 7 minute film, but one day I'm going to make that film. First, I have to get the rights to it, which means I have to track down this old friend's wife out there somewhere.
That is awesome. So there's a book. It just made me think of this book that I was obsessed with as a kid, because as a kid, I liked the Cowsills and the Partridge Family, and the idea that, if I had grown up in a family that was a band, I'd be in a band. And I was a drummer, and so all I was ever told was to stop drumming, and it wasn't encouraged. It was the opposite of encouraged within my family. So I was also obsessed with, history. So I read a book when I was a kid called The Singing Boons. So it's about a musical family on a wagon train. Okay. Are we not in heaven?
There's a movie in that.
Yeah. So I read that book several times. The Singing Family on a Wagon Train. It like blended the Partridge Family and wagon train, if you will. So I have no idea who wrote that book or where to find a copy of the book. I just kept checking it out from the library and reading it again. But yeah, I think that would make a really cool children's movie.
Cool. I like that. That would be fun. So I think we're supposed to talk about some of our favorite actors.
Easy enough, since you go first.
Right? Oh, okay. Well, so I'm currently having like a newly resurrected thing for Patrick Stewart, because he's been reading Shakespeare sonnets daily. And I admit, geek alert, that I was a total Trekkie in high school. And so as long as we've been locked down, I got my subscription to ABC or CBS All Access, I guess it is. And so I got to watch the new Star Trek that he stars in called Picard. And he's just such a good actor, even when he's doing Star Trek, but especially when he's reading Shakespeare. And so I think some of the more classic, like him, Anthony Hopkins, some of those actors that have their roots in Shakespeare and in theater, which is what my background was, because I started out thinking I was going to be like a Shakespeare scholar when I was doing theater. And so those are the people that, I mean, it seems like no matter what role they step into, it's just perfect.
So I feel that way about Tom Hanks. I feel like he carefully researches scripts and the parts that he's playing, and as you get more and more successful, you have more. I think you have more leverage in terms of the work that you do, I think building a career is like building out this platform upon which you can build up, so that, you know, you've got this horizontal platform so that it's going to sustain everything that you do. And I think he's done a careful job of creating a body of work that's just meaningful, impressive, and entertaining. And so I have a lot of admiration for Tom Hanks, and also for Robert Redford for a lot of the same reasons. And a lot of what Robert Redford has done with his personal life is like in line with what matters to me, the environment and the planet and Native Americans. And so those two guys. And then I just really love Carol Burnett. I think she's awesome. And she's also a really good actor, but you know, she was just one of the first women that I saw that was just doing it all. She was hosting her own show and she was willing to just go for it. And she's just
hilarious.
She's a hero. And if you read her book, she's written a lot of great books, but her first book about how she grew up in one tiny room in Hollywood with her grandmother, and she had alcoholic parents. She's also a very heroic person in my view.
Good choices. So I guess our last question is what our top 5 shows or movies are.
I should have prepared better for this.
I know, me too. I mean, I can think of a few off the top of my head. I mean, Once is one of my favorite movies ever.
Yeah, Once is awesome.
I just, that movie touched me. And then The Princess Bride is the movie that I can watch every single day and never get tired of. And for television, my most recent favorite was Madam President, because it was timely and it was intelligent. I mean, it's fictional, but maybe one of these days it won't be. But that was one that I was really sad to see end recently. And then I'm a news junkie also. So Rachel Maddow wins my award for favorite news program every day.
Yeah, Rachel Maddow wins my award for favorite teacher, because
yeah, totally. And Lawrence O'Donnell too, because I can't watch her and then not watch him out.
Oh no, you have to watch Lawrence.
I guess that gives me 5.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go with, Rob Reiner and Spinal Tap. And really, Rob Reiner's body of work is just so robust, you know? And so, you know, because he can go from Stand By Me to Spinal Tap and When Harry Met Sally. And I just love that about Rob Reiner. And so When Harry Met Sally and Spinal Tap are in my top 2. And then Ordinary People, which is Robert Redford directed. It's just a beautiful film about character and family and pain and trauma, and just beautiful. And let's see, what am I leaving? Oh, so Will and Grace. My favorite sitcoms always used to be Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke, and then Will and Grace. If you haven't watched Will and Grace, just watch it. It's on Hulu. Watch it from the beginning. It's just 4 actors that are just delicious. I can't say enough about it. And it just quietly did so much for LGBTQ understanding, and that this is a thing, and this is how some people are, always have been, always will be. So just get it, because let's celebrate each other. And then, Mrs. Maisel, I'm just having like a ball watching Mrs. Maisel. It's just so theatrical. And
I have to add one, because it would be, what I didn't mention is that my first job the day after I graduated from college was with the Second City in Chicago. And I got to stage manage their national touring company and then stage manage one of their main stage shows. And I got to work with, who was there? Sheldon Patinkin, Mandy's brother. And at the time in the cast that was in my traveling company was Stephen Colbert. And on the main stage that I ended up getting to stage manage for a while was Steve Carell. And so I have to add that Saturday Night Live and all the other shows that everybody from the Second City have spun out and gone to since. I mean, I have to watch Colbert every night. And what they can do with satire and comedy, and not every sketch, but you know what? It's still to this day everyone watches for a reason. So, yeah.
Yeah, making news every time.
Yeah.
It's not just the news shows that can influence, enlighten public opinion. It's also the comedy shows, and it's everything that every way of reaching people, because not everybody is receptive to just turning on MSNBC. A lot of young people don't even have cable, so they never hear it unless they hear it in podcast form. But a lot of people watch the talk shows. And so a lot of people get their news from The Daily Show. And so there's all different ways that we can enlighten one another. And I think it's our job to do that now. So I think it's time for us to close. We should also mention that our favorite film festival is the San Diego Jewish Film Festival.
It was an incredible experience, and I would love to be back there, in the audience or with another film.
So we celebrate you guys.
Have to think about another film.
The way that you made us feel and the way that you put on a film festival is extraordinary and exemplary, and we just applaud you.
It was so impressive. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Stay safe and well.
Go ahead. I'm going to hit stop recording and scene.